and he was a bellman. Bernie Starr born and raised here in Brunswick, super news guy. Grew up in a poor family, and to make ends meet in the late 20s, he would box for the Sea Island Company. 1930, I guess it was, not 1930, and so he could make $1 a round. And he was working, and one day he found out that they needed employees for a season on Jekyll Island. He applied, got hired. They hired him down in Brunswick, and he actually went over, and he only worked for 1 year. And then he, something just came up. I'm trying to close this out. Okay, there we got it. And just to give you an example of, here was one person who worked there. I interviewed a woman that was the secretary for a couple of years for the Jekyll Island in the 1910s. She died years ago. I met her when she was like 98, and she was living in the community and just needed a job right out of high school. And so she went over and worked as their secretary in their office behind the scenes. And she was a fun person. She was, in fact, her husband became a very successful attorney in the community. But this is when she was a young woman, pre-marriage, and lived right off of Gloucester Street downtown. So I had a fun time talking with her.
Yeah.
Others would work, like for instance, I did a lot of interviews with members of the black community that worked for the Jekyll Island Club, and some of those, like my friend, he was the flower gardener, Wesley Wellman, worked there from 1924 to 1930, and when the Depression came. The management that had been there working for years, 15, 30 years, retired. And another person came in that he felt was racist, and he wasn't going to work there. And he'd been trained by the Jekyll Island Club for flowers and gardening. And he had studied under German gardeners with degrees from German colleges.
Yeah.
And so he was basically college educated in plants. And I remember when I talked with him, he knew the scientific names of almost every plant, and then the common names, and how would you plant propagate and that kind of stuff. He ended up leaving to go work for the Sea Island Company because they offered him more money. And then because of his expertise, he made more than white gardeners, which was kind of unique because it was training at Jekyll Island. And throughout the 30s and early 40s, or actually 40s, and he left for a time because of World War II. And he started volunteering over at the shipyard, in the back behind the scenes in their tool shed, the tool part where you go in if you were welding or whatever, you had to go check out the equipment. And then he went straight back, and he was the highest paid gardener, and he was black in the 1950s. And he worked for a private family over at the Pomeroy family. And then after that, the family that we named, the son gave the money for the health center over here, Corral. Not Corral, excuse me, that's education. Nunley. They made candy and then buttons for overalls, but candy was their big Nunley candies. And he worked for the people who donated the money, that their parents. And actually retired upper middle class in the 1980s. In fact, when he died, he had something like 80 acres of land out in Buck Swamp Road. He had stock from the late 30s that had been given to him as a gift from another family, the Davisons family, also Sea Island, that when they passed away, the Nunleys, then he went to work. And in fact, he built a house that's still out on Fancy Bluff. The family owns, but nobody lives there. It's more of the family lives everywhere, Delaware, Jacksonville, and they do their Christmas time, they get together and they all stay at the family house. Kind of an intro, but it's a nice brick house that he built in the 60s when he was retiring with some of the money he had. So many of those workers ended up doing quite well. I mean, his Coca-Cola stock was worth, I think, $500,000. Not my business. I don't know exactly, but it was worth a lot of money.
And that Buck Swamp Road, I mean, that stuff is nowadays it's worth a
I know
lot
it.
more.
They leased it out for a hunting club though, so they were making money off of it even when he died in 2004.
Yeah.
So I got a great experience with their life, or his life, and his wife worked for the Jekyll Island Club. And I didn't know her. She had died by the time. Dolly was her name, and she had worked over there was a tea room, and she was a waitress at the tea room. Others I interviewed, so it was just a diverse group, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. Some worked for many years. Others, it was just a starting point, getting training, and then boom, moved on. Many of in the later years, in the 30s, many of the employees left because Sea Island paid them better. Just like my friend Mr. Wellman went. And then patriotic duty hit. Many went to serve, white and black. And for Mr. Wellman, he was too old to serve in to fight in World War II. He was in his late 40s, I think, by that time, or mid 40s. And so what did he do? Boom. He went over to help with the Liberty ships. More, like I said, he worked the tool room over there. But once that was over, he went right back to gardening because that was his expertise. I interviewed. So I guess what it comes down to when I reflect back, man, a diverse group. Some worked for a year, few years. Some worked their whole career there. Mainly the boat captain and administrators, assistant managers tended to stay longer. The other positions, it was black and white employees, which I thought was interesting. There was a man came in to repair their gas lighting machines one time. I just remember this. I don't remember the details off the top of my head. I just recall he was white and he was upset that he was having to stay in a dormitory that blacks were living right below him or right above him or something. And basically, management was, get over that. We're both blacks and whites working here, and we don't want you coming back. Tell your company that you can't handle. So, it was a different mindset, even though it was segregated to a degree. But when you were working, it didn't matter if you're black or white. They were all, it was to support the club. It was a high-end, quality is what mattered versus quantity. As I was always told, that you make quality work. So with employees, they would hire, and I can give you the numbers. I just have to look it up again. I don't remember. And they would have kitchen staff. They would have waiters. Later years, waitresses, but mainly waiters. Serving. Waitresses were usually like the tea room. They would have.
By the way, just to let you know, I'm recording this.
Are you okay? That's fine.
I just wanted
just to remember. Yeah. So I'm okay with that. So just off the top of my head, because I might not be totally telling you accurate, because you know how memory is without my notes.
Yes, I do.
There was staff that were hired just to work what they call the club enclosure, that fence. There really was a fence around it to keep the deer out. And so they had, not only the club had gardeners, many of the families who built houses would have employees coming with them. And that included gardeners for the outside that weren't hired by the club directly. They would have, in their house, they would have butlers. There were sometimes valets, chauffeurs. In earlier years before cars, there was someone who would manage their carriages and their horses.
Yeah.
So you'd have these type of support. And then the club even hired mechanics by 1910s because they had cars.
Yeah.
And they had these little electric vehicles, the red bugs they were referred to. Early ones were gas, later ones were electric. And it looks like a little go-kart basically. But they had to have employees that could maintain those. And they would have a bicycle shop, and there was a man that was hired to do nothing but maintain the bikes and rent the bikes out to members. In the off-season, employees that would stay year-round got to use the bikes, that type of thing. Golf course, there was people hired just to maintain the golf course. Then they would hire caddies in the season, which were usually young boys.
Yes.
And oftentimes it was the children of black employees hired. For instance, I knew a man that was, his name was Earl Hill. He died when I was a kid. I know his brother. His brother's still living. He's like 100 or 99 or something. And that's what he did. One winter season to make extra money. His dad worked on the road gang because they had oyster shell roads. So that was another thing. They hired people to do nothing but go and they'd barge in oyster shells and then crush them with a roller. And he was on that team to maintain the roads and the bicycle paths they had there. But his son, to make extra money, worked as a caddy. And I remember reading a story that I never heard it from him, that there was a time when J.P. Morgan Jr. and I think it was Frank Goodyear had not Frank Goodyear, excuse me, another club member, I don't remember the club member, would bet dimes over who would do the best on a hole, and they went, and Earl Hill was there, and none of the one who lost the bet didn't have the money, so they had to borrow from Earl Hill, who had a dime in his pocket, and then they paid him back.
Yeah.
Little stories like that. But in fact, he learned how to play golf and started a professional golf tournament in the early 50s or mid 50s on Jekyll Island. And it ran all the way up to the early 80s, and then he died like in 82 or 83.
Wow.
But he was a great golfer, and what did he do? He passionate for golf. He started a professional tournament, and at the first tournament fundraiser in '59, so I think I have the dates off a little bit. So '59, they had no, it was '61. I'm telling you wrong. Not the first tournament.
Okay.
I got to look up my notes.
You're fine.
I'm a little hazy on the dates. But at one of the first tournaments, to raise money to pay professional golfers to compete, they had Otis Redding do a concert on Jekyll Island. They took the money raised from that concert, and that was the purse to win. I interviewed the first African American to play in the Masters, and his name, he's still living in Pompano Beach. His name will come to me. He was the first winner of that tournament, and it was fun. I talked with him about his memories of coming to Jekyll, play that tournament.
Now you got the McGladrey.
Yeah, now that's our new. Yeah, the Jekyll Island Club would also hire, in terms of other employees, chambermaids. They would have. They had the electrical plant there, so of course they had people who were hired to do nothing but shovel coal into, because it was burned off of coal, the light electricity. They would hire those type of positions. So if you worked for the club, it was a good steady paycheck, and you usually were given either, if you're a family, they would have houses there, so you'd give a house to live in for the season when you're there, or if you're single, they had dormitories or residence halls, kind of where you could go and stay and work there. But I'll look for a list to give you an idea of some of those employee positions. I'm missing some things.
Yeah,
like that.
No, that's a lot. I didn't even expect all that. So thank you.
Yeah, but I have a list of it, so I can give it to you. And it fluctuated year to year.
Yeah.
How many people they would hire, what positions, that type of thing. And then, of course, the families would oftentimes bring in their own employees if they had a house. If they didn't, normally they would just come down and stay in the hotel, which is what most of the members did. They would stay at the clubhouse.
I didn't know that.
You'd have to lease a room, and it would just be, you pay monthly. Everything was on your tab, so to speak. So you'd go eat breakfast, you eat lunch, you eat dinner, and they kept tabs of what that was. You just paid it at the end of the month. Each room cost amount per night, and it wasn't cheap. In 1901 or 02 period, and I might have these numbers off, it was something like $9 a night to rent a room. But that's basically what a chambermaid was earning a month.
Wow.
Somewhere in that range. I might have the numbers off, but it was roughly that equivalent. One night was equivalent to what somebody was working. So it was very expensive to be a member. It wasn't cheap. But employees tended to be paid well compared to other, like, say, working for a hotel in Brunswick.
Yeah.
You would have been paid higher.
And
up until the 30s, and then they got
its
tight.
competitor was Sea Island.
Yeah, and that became when that opened up. And one of the problems they started losing employees was tipping. They decided they were no longer, club members were not allowed to tip.
Oh.
They were trying to keep members there, and they were trying to cut their costs down. Of course, that didn't make employees. That was a big factor. You got a tip at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And that was nice. And I remember people talking about, well, I'm not going to work here if you can't do,
Yeah.
And then World War II hit, and that pretty much ended. The plans were to reopen the club after the end. The last season was 1941 winter, and they planned on, we'll reopen in a year or two. But there were too many children of club members, employees, and even children of employees volunteered to serve in the war. So you just didn't have that worker shortage was down, and even club members, it was down. They're like, man, we don't have time to go there where everything else is going on. And they just couldn't afford to reopen it. 1946, they were going to reopen, and a Gould, Frank Gould, the grandson of Jay Gould, who had built a house over there, Mariana Cottage, was named after his daughter, was going to financed building a causeway over to Jekyll Island. In 1945, it might have been, not 46,
Okay.
late 45. And he died of a heart attack. And when that happened, no other club member that was still, they didn't have a full 100 members by that time, maybe 18 to 20. And he was one of the ones that had the expendable income. When he died, there was just no way. No one else was stepping up. Oh, we'll do this. And that's what the state of Georgia, 1946, they had a committee for the legislative committee looking at islands or beachfront property in Georgia to make it a public park. And that's how it got started. And then they just condemned the island in 1947 and bought it for like $150,000, $160,000. I don't remember the exact price off the top of my head. And that pretty much ended the club. And they had a skeleton crew in the 40s, World War II. Maybe about 6 or 7 full-time employees. And then they would hire crews of Sea Island employees to come over part-time and clear the roads instead of having a full gang of employees. They just subcontract out. But they had a full-time manager, and I was friends with the daughter of the manager. She died years ago from Darien. And she was a teenager, young adult living there. It was fun to hear her talk about the World War II soldiers being bivouacked over there, training and mounted beach patrols.
And also, you had the U-boats. Were
not
far from.
Well, when I remember her talking about how on the north end of Jekyll there was oil crates with including everything from chickens to you name it, all up on the north end of Jekyll from the bombing, from that missile. And that's, the club was already closed by that time, but there's a myth that it closed because of World War II. No, it closed because of financial reasons and manpower. People were volunteering to go. So they said, let's just close, we won't open this year. So there was nobody really over there. But when that happened, kind of in the 1950s, kind of conflated with, it was because of World War II they closed. No, it was other factors. They thought, these wealthy people, we got to save them from being attacked. No. There was even somebody told me, an employee told me that they remembered someone, there were 8 spies dropped off on Germany, 4 in Jacksonville, 4 maybe in the New Jersey area on the coast. They were going to come in and blow up railroads and stuff. I could find no records that a waiter had, but I did find that the manager in the later years managed several clubs up in New York, and there was definitely one of those 8 spies had worked for clubs up in the New York area. And I think that's where the connection is. But I could never really there was no documentation showing that somebody had worked that was a spy for the Jekyll Island Club. But it does look like the manager operated other clubs, and I think that one of those spies did work for his club up in New York. And you know how oral traditions get goofed up. I think that's where that comes from. But I will look. I might have some. What's your deadline?
It's November 30th.
Okay, so we have a couple of weeks, but you need it early. But email me. I'll see if I can send some images y'all can use.
Okay.
That I own that you can just put up on it.
I got class at 11, and that's when I meet with my partner. And then we're going to meet tomorrow really and go over like what exactly we 100% want to do.
Okay. Send me a list of what might be useful, and I'll see if I can send that. Give you some stuff.
Yeah.
Here in the next week, and definitely by early next, Thanksgiving break, I can get stuff up. I have to search for it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, cool deal. Well, nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
And